People think that personal development is shiny and fun and exciting. And yes, it will change your life. And yes, it can be fun. But for the most part, the work that does the most hurts. It is hard to look at yourself and look at yourself as a whole person and look at yourself and your rights and your wrongs and really acknowledge them. And you acknowledge them in order to work through them. And the first step of acknowledgement is always the hardest part. The awareness is very, very hard, and it's important work, but it's hard work. So everyone thinks personal development is books and podcasts, and which is funny because this is a podcast. But they think just listening and not doing the work is going to help them, and that's not the case. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Say More Words. My name is Tamika Taylor, your hostess with the mostest. As you can hear, Texas allergies are destroying my system, so I have a different voice. And that leads us into the song of the day, which is Smelly Cat by Phoebe from Friends. Now, I don't think I can add it to the playlist. I'm going to try and find it. But every time my voice gets like this, I think of, or like allergies hit, I think of two different things. Phoebe singing Smelly Cat when she's all phlegmy and she says, "Good night, my babies." That, and in Clueless, when Cher says, "Dion, when your allergies act up, take out your nose ring." Because I also have a nose ring. Anyway, so those are two things I think of when I'm sick. And I hope you now think of them too. Welcome back. I am super excited today to come to you solo and talk to you about something that's super important. And that is emotional competency. If you are not following me on Instagram, I highly suggest that you do so. My Instagram handle is @the_Tamika_Taylor. And every Monday night, I go live with my good friend, Dr. Lacey Book, and we have a show called This Might Hurt a Little. And it's all about the hard truths of personal development. People think that personal development is shiny and fun and exciting. And yes, it will change your life. And yes, it can be fun. But for the most part, the work that does the most hurts. It's not fun. It is hard to look at yourself and look at yourself as a whole person and look at yourself and your rights and your wrongs and really acknowledge them, and you acknowledge them in order to work through them. And the first step of acknowledgement is always the hardest part. The awareness is very, very hard, and it's important work, but it's hard work. So everyone thinks personal development is books and podcasts, and which is funny because this is a podcast. But they think just listening and not doing the work is going to help them, and that's not the case. And so today I wanted to talk a little bit about emotional competency, because on This Might Hurt a Little Bit, we've been talking a lot of about emotional competency. And one, I want to start off with and say that your emotional competency and your emotional awareness is on you. It's on you, boo-boo. It is on you to work through the hard stuff. It is on you to have the hard conversations with yourself in order to have the hard conversations with everybody else. And you cannot determine other people's emotional competency. Okay, you can guess. You can say that certain people are not emotionally connected to you, but you can't determine an individual's emotional competency for themselves. Now, the average individual has very low emotional competency. You've heard me say it before. I'm going to say it again, that the average human understands 3 emotions. 3. There's 87 complex emotions and experiences, and that's just from what Brene Brown says. There's probably more. But the average person can pick out 3, and that is happy, mad, and sad. Happy, mad, sad. We all know those ones. And I like to call happy, mad, sad umbrella emotions. What does that mean? It means that that's the only emotion that you understand that you're having at that moment. And so you attach an experience or a feeling to that emotion as opposed to what it could be. For example, some people get mad, and inside of that anger, there could be resentment, shame, blame, guilt. There could be fear, hostility. There's so many different emotions that anger masks, but people choose not to have a deeper emotional competency, and so they get stuck on anger. What the problem with that is that in order to have structured conversations and conversations that people can understand, you have to understand the language of emotions. And that is your emotional competency, the language of the emotion that you're trying to feel. Now, emotional competency is very, very hard for some people because we were raised by people who 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 were raised by people. And in those past generations, emotions weren't something that were allowed to be talked about. There's a lot of men today whose fathers, parents told them to stop crying, that men weren't allowed to feel things. And so we have a lot of emotionally pent up men roaming the world right now. Or like, and that comes and that stems, right? It's generational. Your emotional competency, very much like your money competency, is passed down through your generations. During the Depression, they weren't allowed to have emotions, right? They didn't need to have emotions because, or it wasn't even allowed. It was just that they were just trying to survive, right? And in surviving, you don't really get to have emotions. Okay. And so then that was passed on, and it was passed on. There's men and women who went to war, and there's no feelings in love and war, right? And so then that was passed on throughout all these generations. Like, there was a lack of emotional competency. Well, now today we have a luxury. I mean, we are still in war, but we aren't in as great of a famine as in the past. And we have the luxury to look at our emotions. Unfortunately, in the United States, we do not have enough mental health care professionals for every single individual in our country. I wish we did. We just don't. More and more are graduating each day, and it's still not enough. But we have the luxury of having mental health professionals that exist in the world. We have, I think, like, it's wild to me that you can go onto an app and talk to your therapist. Like, you don't even have to go in anymore. You can go on an app and you could talk to them and you could text them. Like, what a time to be alive. All that's to say, your emotional competency was passed down, but just because your parents showed up a certain way doesn't mean you have to show up a certain way. Your own emotional competency requires you to become aware. It requires you to become aware of what you are uncomfortable with, what you don't like. It requires you to learn the language of emotions so that you can accurately portray what you're feeling to the people around you. It is hard to ask for help. It is hard to say, hey, this is not serving me. It's hard to acknowledge ways in which maybe you weren't serving yourself throughout all of these years emotionally, in an emotional competent sense. What it means to be emotionally competent is means that you are emotionally aware and you have the language to express what you are feeling. Okay, the language to express what you are feeling. Being an emotionally competent person is not a bad thing. Emotions are not a bad thing. What is bad is when you allow your emotions to make you an asshole, right? Where you allow your emotions to treat others poorly, or where you allow your emotions to control your life. Emotions are not bad. They are not wrong. They are a tool for life, for language, for experience, and you're not supposed to use them against people as daggers, as weapons against them. You also cannot tell others how to feel. You also cannot tell others how you make them feel. See, feelings and emotions are such an interesting thing because we think that we can change them in other people. Now, yes, you can affect someone's mood. You can make them mad or sad or happy, or they can choose to feel that way because of an experience that they are in with you. But you cannot tell somebody that they have to change or fix it overnight. Now, if you're a product of the 80s like I am, we had a lot of parents who told us to suck it up or to quit crying or to get over it. And there was not a lot of space and grace to understand what you're feeling in that space. There was a lot of shutting down of emotions and not very much talking in order to move on to the next thing, be seen and not heard, stop crying. That was one, that we heard pretty often. Stop crying. You're crying for no reason. When in actuality, especially as for little kids, they're crying because they're growing or they're hungry or their emotions are all over the place, or they don't even know what they're crying for because they're not emotionally competent. They don't know anything. They just know and are reacting to their body and their experiences. The thing as adults is why I say like we can't allow our emotions to control us is because sometimes as adults we have outbursts or things happen. Hangry is a big thing. I'm adulting is a thing you see on Instagram. We allow these things to exist, and then we don't, and we know that we're having a hard time or we're having a great time or XYZ, and we choose not to look at the emotions behind it or the emotional experience we're having. Back to, you can't let your emotions let you treat others like an asshole, because your emotions are of your own. It is your job and your duty to process. Now, there are plenty of people out there that you can process with. That's one of the beautiful things that I get to do with my one-on-one clients is process emotions and experiences that they are having. But one of the most important parts of your own personal development is developing your own emotional awareness, which leads to your own emotional competency. If you want to change anything for your family, and there's plenty of people out there who are like, I'm changing the tone of my family by changing the money in our family, or I'm changing, the generational wealth in our family. Generational wealth is great, but generational wealth means shit if you are carrying over generational trauma over and over and over again. If you're carrying over generational emotional damage over and over and over again. Get to a space where you acknowledge all of the emotions, good, bad, and actually in the line, like there are no bad emotions. All of our emotions are in place to protect us. It's primal. Emotional competency and emotional security is a very primal thing. In order to feel safe, you have to feel loved and you have to feel cared for. That is a primal need. And so emotional competency also equals emotional safety. And it's just when you are surrounded by people who have emotionally safe conversations, the conversations are different. When you, in an emotionally safe conversation too, you recognize that both beings have emotions that they may not understand, they may not project well, and they need to be able to talk through. So it's just very important. This is just like the start of the conversation of emotional competency, because emotions are so complex. Why is all this important though? One, like I said, so you don't pass it through to generation, but two, because it's inside of emotional competency that you learn grace. You learn grace for others. You learn grace for yourself. When you start to understand that every human being on the planet, whether they understand emotions or not, are operating and functioning and showing up in the world based off of their own emotional lens, the conversation changes. Okay, the conversation changes and is different. You have more grace and compassion for others, and you have more grace and compassion for yourself. That's part of the reason why I studied the Enneagram. That's why I became certified in the Enneagram. That's why I teach the Enneagram so heavily, because emotionally competency makes or breaks relationships, conversations, experiences, basically life. Okay, it makes or breaks your experience here on this planet. And so I welcome you into this emotional competency journey with me as we start to break down and start to talk about different emotional competency things. I invite you to join Lacey and I on Monday nights at 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern Time, as we get together on Instagram Live, and we start to talk, and we talk more and more about emotional competency and different emotions that people feel and experience. I welcome you to this conversation because it is life changing. it changes everything in your life when you can give yourself more grace and you can give others more grace as well. As we come out of the hangover of 2020, 2020 taught people to hate each other for having different opinions. In 2024, we're having a different conversation, that we are all emotional beings, welcome and willing to have our own emotional experience, but your own emotional experience is on you. It's not your responsibility to maintain and manage and look at everybody else's emotional experience. So I welcome you as we move into more emotional conversations where we start talking about complex emotions and we start breaking down the Enneagram. My Enneagram series is coming here soon, and I'm super excited to bring different Enneagram types on the podcast so you can learn more about them. They'll give you the chance to learn more about you. It'll give you the chance to learn more about the people in your lives, and it will give you more grace. Okay. Personal development, its main purpose is to humble you, to help you grow, to help you learn, to help you persevere, and most importantly, to have more grace. This life is beautiful. It is hard. It is complicated. There are big emotions and big things that happen, but above all else, it is filled with love, joy, happiness, and it is beautiful. It is a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'm so thankful that you choose to go along on this ride with me. So in the next coming weeks, get ready. We're jumping head first into emotional competency, and I'm so excited to share this space with you. So in the words of Phoebe, bye bye, my babies. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next week.